Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Reverend Steve Andrews. Today we continue Judges with chapter 20. Then all the people of Israel came out from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead, and the congregation assembled as one man to Yahweh at Mizpah. And the chiefs of all the people of all the tribes of Israel presented themselves in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 men on foot, that drew the sword. Now the people of Benjamin heard that the people of Israel had gone up to Mizpah. And the people of Israel said, "Tell us, how did this evil happen?" And the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, "I came to Gibeah, that belongs to Benjamin, I and my concubine, to spend the night. And the leaders of Gibeah rose against me, and surrounded the house against me by night. They meant to kill me, and they violated my concubine, and she is dead. So I took hold of my concubine, and cut her in pieces, and sent her throughout all the country of the inheritance of Israel, for they have committed abomination and outrage in Israel. Behold, you people of Israel, all of you, give your advice and counsel here." And all the people arose as one man, saying, "None of us will go to his tent, and none of us will return to his house. But now this is what we will do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot, and we will take 10 men of 100 throughout all the tribes of Israel, and 100 of 1,000, and 1,000 of 10,000, to bring provisions for the people, that when they come, they may repay Gibeah of Benjamin for all the outrage that they have committed in Israel." So all the men of Israel gathered against the city united as one man. And the tribes of Israel sent men through all the tribe of Benjamin, saying, "What evil is this that has taken place among you? Now therefore give up the men, the worthless fellows in Gibeah, that we may put them to death and purge evil from Israel." But the Benjaminites would not listen to the voice of their brothers, the people of Israel. Then the people of Benjamin came together out of the cities to Gibeah to go out to battle against the people of Israel. And the people of Benjamin mustered out of their cities on that day 26,000 men who drew the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who mustered 700 chosen men. Among all these were 700 chosen men who were left-handed. Everyone could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. And the men of Israel, apart from Benjamin, mustered 400,000 men who drew the sword. All these were men of war. The people of Israel arose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God, "Who shall go up first for us to fight against the people of Benjamin?" And Yahweh said, "Judah shall go up first." Then the people of Israel rose in the morning and encamped against Gibeah. And the men of Israel went out to fight against Benjamin, and the men of Israel drew up the battle line against them at Gibeah. The people of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and destroyed on that day 22,000 men of the Israelites. But the people, the men of Israel, took courage and again formed the battle line in the same place where they had formed it on the first day. And the people of Israel went up and wept before Yahweh until evening. And they inquired of Yahweh, "Shall we again draw near to fight against our brothers, the people of Benjamin?" And Yahweh said, "Go up against them." So the people of Israel came near against the people of Benjamin the second day. And Benjamin went against them out of Gibeah the second day, and destroyed 18,000 men of the people of Israel. All these were men who drew the sword. Then all the people of Israel, the whole army, went up and came to Bethel and wept. And they sat there before Yahweh and fasted that day until evening, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before Yahweh. And the people inquired of Yahweh, for the ark of the covenant was there in those days. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron, ministered before it in those days, saying, "Shall we go out once more to battle against our brothers, the people of Benjamin? Or shall we cease?" And Yahweh said, "Go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand." So Israel set men in ambush around Gibeah. And the people of Israel went up against the people of Benjamin on the third day, and set themselves in array against Gibeah as at other times. And the people of Benjamin went out against the people, and were drawn away from the city. And as at the other times, they began to strike and kill some of the people in the highways, one of which goes up to Bethel, and the other to Gibeah, and in the open country about 30 men of Israel. And the people of Benjamin said, "They are routed before us, as at the first." But the people of Israel said, "Let us flee, and draw them away from the city to the highways." And all the men of Israel rose up out of their place, and set themselves in array at Baal Tamar. And the men of Israel who were in ambush rushed out of their place from Gibeah, And there came against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of all Israel, and the battle was hard. But the Benjaminites did not know that disaster was close upon them. And Yahweh defeated Benjamin before Israel, and the people of Israel destroyed 25,100 men of Benjamin that day. All these were men who drew the sword. So the people of Benjamin saw that they were defeated. The men of Israel gave ground to Benjamin because they trusted the men in ambush who they had set against Gibeah. Then the men in ambush hurried and rushed against Gibeah. The men in ambush moved out and struck all the city with the edge of the sword. Now the appointed signal between the men of Israel and the men in the main ambush was that when they made a great cloud of smoke rise up out of the city, the men of Israel should turn in battle. Now Benjamin had begun to strike and kill about 30 men of Israel. They said, "Surely they are defeated before us, as in the first battle." But when the signal began to rise out of the city in a column of smoke, the Benjaminites looked behind them, and behold, the whole city went up in smoke to heaven. Then the men of Israel turned, and the men of Benjamin were dismayed, for they saw that disaster was close upon them. Therefore they turned their backs before the men of Israel in the direction of the wilderness. But the battle overtook them, and those who came out of the cities were destroying them in their midst. Surrounding the Benjaminites, they pursued them and trod them down from Nohah as far as opposite Gibeah on the east. 18,000 men of Benjamin fell, all of them men of valor, and they turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon. 5,000 men of them were cut down in the highways, and they were pursued hard to Gadam, and 2,000 men of them were struck down. So all who fell that day of Benjamin were 25,000, men who drew the sword, all of them men of valor. But 600 men turned and fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and remained at the rock of Rimmon 4 months. And the men of Israel turned back against the people of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, the city, men and beasts, and all that they found. And all the towns that they found they set on fire. This is the word of the Lord. Today's text is civil war. Yesterday we saw how the men of Gibeah mistreated those who had come to be sojourners, guests among them, and violently raped the concubine, the wife of the Levite. This is the result of that. Israel comes against Benjamin in judgment. Now, the text is going to begin with that recap very briefly of what we read yesterday. It's going to show us that all of Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, is the common way to indicate all of Israel, because Dan is the northernmost city, Beersheba the southernmost, including the land of Gilead, so the tribes of Gad and Manasseh and Reuben that had settled to the east of the Jordan River. They all gathered together as one man to Yahweh at Mizpah. Mizpah here being, there are multiple Mizpahs, this one being the one in Benjamin, so they're close to where they're going to do battle. United as one man. That is a very rare thing here in the book of Judges. They've been all doing what is right in their own eyes, but they have finally come together over something, over the horrendous events of chapter 19. And so they then ask they ask the Levite to reveal to them, to tell them the rest of the account. What happened? What brought this about? And so he does, and you can read his little reflection starting in verse 4. It's only 4 through 7, and it's not that in-depth. I would suggest that you ask your children, if you've studied chapter 19 and 20 back-to-back here, ask your children if he's missing any important details. The primary detail I see that he's missing is that he sent her out there, right? He offered her up to the mob instead of himself. So that was a move of cowardice, his fear that drove that. Now, he finishes by asking them for their advice, their counsel. What should be done about this tragedy? It truly is a tragedy, right? There was great sin committed. He's just not innocent of that sin, as he might be painting himself in the picture here that he provided. 400,000 men were gathered together for this, and they agree with one another that they aren't going home until this is handled, until this is taken care of. They agree to do this by lot, which means they are going to trust the Spirit to guide them. So they're going to cast lots to figure out who is going to go, who is going to be responsible to fight, who is going to be responsible for providing the provisions for the army, and so forth. They're going to use lots to do that. Not much of that is shared with us here in the text. Only the idea that it's 1 out of 10, right? You get 3 different pictures of that: 10 out of 100, 100 out of 1,000, 1,000 out of 10,000. Those are all tenths that are being taken. 10% of the 400,000, would give you 40,000, which happens to be how many of them are killed on the first and the second day. So it's a little tricky to know what to do with the idea of the tenth that's going on here, because they do have more men that go into battle than that. Now, we then see they come to Benjamin and they ask them about it. That's verse 12. What evil has taken place among you? And they ask the Benjaminites to give over the men of Gibeah who have committed this atrocity. Give them over for judgment, that we may put them to death and purge evil from Israel. Based on Old Testament law, based on what you can read in the book of Deuteronomy and such, this would be the appropriate response. The Benjaminites don't hand them over, though. It's a difficulty here. The Benjaminites are willing to defend these men who have done such an abomination. Maybe a question to talk about as a family together would be on this note. It would be something about, why did they defend them? Who is our allegiance to? Right? This becomes a tribal thing. The Benjaminites are not handing them over because they're Benjaminites. They're not going to hand over fellow Benjaminites to the rest of Israel. They're going to protect them because they're of the same tribe. And this is not the way we're taught to look at things as the church today, right? As Christians, it doesn't matter what people group you come from. You either are a Christian or you aren't. And those are the two races described really in the New Testament era of Scripture. We are people of God. We're not Americans or Canadians or Mexicans or any of those sorts of different tribal 21st century designations. We're Christians. The Christian who is currently hiding in an underground camp in China because their faith has been recently outlawed, they are just as much my brother in Christ or my sister in Christ as the family that I get to go home to every day, right? My wife and my kids. It's not a tribal thing. It really isn't. But that's what's going on, or at least that appears to be what's going on here in the text. So instead, we end up with civil war. Battle against one another. The Benjaminites muster together 26,000 troops to fight. Maybe 26,700, the way it looks like it's written there in verse 15, including 700 men who are left-handed and could sling a stone at a hair and not miss. What a description, right? That is a skillful accuracy, and deadly as well. So Israel arises, they go to Bethel to inquire of God, and the Lord tells them to send Judah first. They go, they fight against Gibeah, they fight against Benjamin, and they lose 22,000 dead. They mourn before God until the evening, and they ask him again, and he sends them again. And then we see they lose a second time on the second day. They lose 18,000 men. So they've lost 40,000 soldiers, and we have not learned of any death among the Benjaminites. So they fast this time. They weep before the Lord. They offer offerings before the Lord, and they inquire of God. That's where we learn that the Ark of the Covenant was there in those days, so in Bethel, which is interesting. We're never told about it arriving in Bethel there. It's been in Shiloh for a long time, so it's going to leave Shiloh. It'll be from Shiloh that it'll be captured by the Philistines. So what it's doing in Bethel right now, I cannot say. The scriptures don't cover a lot of the movement of the tabernacle after the Israelites get into the land of promise. But that's where they are, and they are inquiring of the Lord. This time his answer is different. Go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. This could be something to draw out with your children and conversation. What's different about their question here on the third time than it was the first two times? Notice the first two times the Israelites assume that it's the Lord's will that they go up against the Benjaminites. They don't ask. It's not a question of, should we go up against them? Should we do this thing? It's just, we're going. Who gets to go first, God? See how it's their directive? They do it again the second day, but when you come to the third day, they say, shall we go out once more? Or shall we cease? And when they finally give the authority in the battle, they don't have the ability to give God the authority. When they finally recognize that the authority to do this lies with the Lord and not with themselves, it changes. The Lord's response changes to, go up, for tomorrow I will give them into your hand. And that's exactly what happens. The first paragraph there at verse 29 is a little bit more of a summary. The paragraph that starts midway through verse 36 is a little bit more of an in-depth look at the same account. So what happens essentially with all of this is that the Israelites then they go again, and early on the Benjaminites think that they're winning. They strike down 30 men of Israel, so it's a small number, but not irrelevant, right? The victory seems to be in their hands again. Everything's going well, but they don't realize that they're being drawn out into a trap. So the men of Israel have given ground to Benjamin, as verse 36 says, because they have set that ambush against the city of Gibeah. And as the Benjaminites are chasing the army of Israel, the ambushers attack Gibeah behind them and destroy the city, killing the men who did the perverse act of the previous chapter, and then setting the city on fire. And that fire, that smoke coming up out of that city, would be the signal to the men of Israel to turn back and fight. So it was a trap, and the Benjaminites recognize that the city has been defeated, and that crushes their morale, and the battle goes swiftly against them. And suddenly it turns, and Israel is the one victorious. 25,100 men of Benjamin falling in that single day. Yahweh defeated Benjamin before Israel, as we see in verse 35. They only had 26,700 men to start with, and they lose 25,100 of them. 1,600 left, 600 of whom flee to the rock of Rimmon. We don't know where that is. We don't know where Gadam or Noha are either. Unknown locations to us today. But they flee there, and they stay there for 4 months in hiding, hoping, I guess, that things would calm down and settle down. But as they do that, the Israelites go through the land of Benjamin, and they strike all the towns that they find and set them on fire, killing men of Benjamin and killing their beasts, and just laying waste to Benjamin for Benjamin's part in Gibeah's sin.